Hello, everyone. I am Becky Spatford from RA for All, where I help library workers help readers find their next great read. And I'm happy to be your guest host for this evening segment of Every Library Live's Banned Book Week Fest today. Before we begin, I want to let you know that Every Library is the National Political Action Committee for Libraries. The last few years have seen an alarming rise in the number of book bans in schools and public libraries around the country. Every library has been directly involved in over 100 local campaigns to oppose censorship and defend the First Amendment, helping to restore books and preserve access. Its Fight for the First campaign platform, combined with its pro bono campaign advising, is making a difference. I'd like you to invite you to check out fightforthefirst.org for more information. But all week, Every Library Live is focusing on not only the problem of book bans, but also on changing the headlines. We need to reconnect with reading and the joy it brings. We want to celebrate readers and writers and libraries because it's not just a fight against censorship, it's a fight to have a society where every story can be told and discovered. I was already with you once today, and I'm back again. This time, I'm excited to talk with Kiese Laymon and Gabino Iglesias about their books, their writing process, and their connection to readers and libraries. Let me welcome them now, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Kiese, can you go first?
Yeah, thank you so much, Becky, for having us. My name is Kiese Laymon. I'm a writer and professor from Jackson, Mississippi, and I have written a few books. The last book I published was a book called Heavy, an American memoir, and I have a new kids book coming out soon called City Summer, Country Summer, and I'm really happy to be here. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And I will say, Kiese, I was happy to watch you get the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Heavy
Mm.
as a librarian. And I was also there when Gabino Iglesias won his Stoker Award, sitting right next to him. So, Gabino, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm basically on tour, and the intro that I've been using is I'm Gabino Iglesias, and I dabble, and then I leave it there. But now you said an award, so I have to say more. Yeah. I write things. Nothing that I write is for kids, so make sure that you remember kids to say that. You can go read that book. Mine's not for kids. And I write about books for a lot of places, NPR, New York Times, etc., and write horror and crime.
And we're going to talk a little bit about your books today. Thank you both for being here. You know, since we're here to celebrate the joy of reading and discoverability and connecting books with readers, I thought a really fun place for us to start would be with your personal journey as readers. Often when we do these interviews, you know, we want to ask them right away about writing. But as I know, working at the library for so many years, our writers, our authors are some of our biggest readers. So I really want you to talk about your personal journey as a reader and take that idea as broadly as you want. But I would love you to talk about, you know, what types of books you were drawn to, what kind of access you had to books as a kid. If the library comes up, great. And also specifically because this matters, because both of you put yourselves in your writing, even when it's fiction, right? How you did or didn't see yourself in the books you read growing up. And we're going to let Gabino go first.
This three things happened exactly at the same time. The first thing was I was never a good student, so I would get sent to the library a lot of times. And this is beautiful. I couldn't write this because it's too beautiful. Our librarian, her name was Esperanza, which means hope in Spanish. We call her Epi, and she would always take me in and, you know, don't burn the place down, don't break anything, go pick a book, sit down and read. So I was doing that for many days. And in that process, I discovered Latin American writer Horacio Quiroga, who wrote a book of short stories called Tales of Love, Madness, and Death. And I was hooked with that. At the same time, my dad, who has no education but was always a writer, a big reader, he would get free books from friends, and when he didn't like anything, he would pass it my way. And he started reading one and said, "I don't like this. Maybe you will." I was about 12, and it was Richard Laymon's Endless Night.
Oh, wow.
And I shouldn't have been reading that, but Shout out to my dad, because that's why I'm here today. We didn't have middle grade back then. It was just you went from Dr. Seuss to Stephen King, and there was no in between. So I did that, and then it was a problem. Access was a problem. Puerto Rico is 100 miles long by 35 miles wide. We had our first commercial sort of big bookstore in I believe the summer of 1998. That was Borders Bookstore. That was it. If you wanted books before that, you had to order, which was not really a thing in 1998 for people who didn't have the internet like me, or you had to go to the library and get your books there. So I've been Team Library from day one. That's where it all started. And then the last part of the question was about putting yourselves in your books, right?
Well, yeah. Well, seeing yourself in the books you were reading and how, that was or wasn't a thing.
Yeah, no, I wasn't there. I wasn't there. There wasn't a lot of brown folks in the books that I read. There wasn't any sort of Asian folks, no black folks. It was Laymon and Brian Keene and Stephen King. Stephen King had like one magical Negro once in a while, but I don't think that's not
Green Mile.
Yeah, right. Green Mile. I was noted.
Green Mile.
It was Lovecraft. It was Poe. It was when the big bookstore opened. It was whatever I could get in the $4 sort of like small paperbacks table, and that was Patricia Cornwell and James Patterson and the eternal big names. So I was never in one of my books. There was never any Spanish in any of those books. Wow. And I wanted to see that. And I think House of Bone and Rain kind of ties into that. I knew that it was going to be hard to sell. Hey, this is a book about Puerto Rico, about colonialism and storms and politics. But then it was time to write it. We're seeing a change, a big change, and it's time to push a little harder and make that wave a little bigger. So I think that's why both of us are here today.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. What about you, Kiese? What was your journey? Similar, question. And because I know it was, you weren't doing it in different languages like Gabino, you had to learn English, but you had a similar situation too.
Yeah. And, I want to just say, I was thinking about what Gabino said about being sent to the library. And, I just started working in Houston 2 years ago. And recently they passed this thing in Texas where they're trying to turn libraries into detention centers. Because like you, when I got in trouble, I got sent to the library. Yep. And I can come full circle and talk about being sent to the library in 5th or 6th grade. But, my parents were from like really rural, super black towns in Mississippi. They went to college in the 70s. My mother had me when she was a sophomore in college. So I was sort of like, I wasn't sort of like, these were post-civil rights people who really wanted their children to be, at that time, like, black and proud. So my parents divorced, and my mama, like, she became a professor, and she pushed reading of everything early. But ironically, my mother didn't want me, by the time she becomes a professor, she didn't want me reading Black lit because she thought that could radicalize me. So she wanted me to read all this canonical stuff. So we had all that Black stuff that I eventually fell in love with on the shelves. But she would, sometimes I get in trouble for reading that. She wanted me to read, Wuthering Heights and Tale of Two Cities and all of that. But what's interesting is that one day when I was in school, probably like 5th grade, I got in trouble because I was always getting in trouble, and I got sent to the library. And there was this book there called We Hate Everything But Girls. And again, like, even at that point, I was sort of known by my friends as someone who played football and basketball, but also someone who really loved to read and write. But I didn't really love to read and write. I just had to read and write or I was going to get a whooping. And there was a big difference. But I went to the library and I saw this book, We Hate Everything But Girls. And it was just like, nothing about that book had anything to do with me. The cover was like these white girls. And then it was like this weird font. But I opened it up and it was about this gang of like white girls who started this club called We Hate Everything But Boys. Maybe that's what it was. And I just fell in love with that book. Like, I fell in love with that book. And part of it was because it was like supposedly like 12-year-olds or 5th graders talking about liking other people. They weren't talking about sex necessarily. They were talking about kissing and stuff like that. And, like when you're 10, 11 years old, like that stuff is interesting to you. So as a writer, I haven't even talked about this before. Like the book that I found the first pleasure in was actually a book on Langston Hughes, and then the second book was this book called We Hate Everything But Girls. But I would have never found that had they sent me to a detention center that didn't have books. So I was just thinking about what Gabino said about being sent to libraries, and now a lot of kids don't even have libraries. They're being sent to these detention centers, which is absolutely horrendous, to my estimation. But so from there, I like Gabino. I grew up in Mississippi, the blackest state in the union. There weren't many black books taught in my school at all. I was offended by that early on. I started writing for the campus newspaper. For the student newspaper, and I just started trying to. And I became obsessed with hip hop, because hip hop to me seemed like something where at least young black kids primarily were writing themselves into art. And I just became obsessed with like the way they were writing themselves into art. Like a lot of people grew up with. I wanted to be a rapper at one time. I was not good at it enough, and I just started writing books. That's the long, short story of it all. Yeah.
No, I think that's great. I think what's interesting is both of you were sent to classics that didn't necessarily reflect you. I always, going back to you a little bit, I know I've heard you tell the story before, like Lovecraft was not just your entry into a lot of horror literature, and it's reflected this really in House of Bone and Rain a lot, but it was also your connection to English, right? To have you help sort of, which is, his prose is so heavy and cumbersome. So the fact that it helped you, but those books are so racist, right? Can you talk a little about your discovery of your love of it, but then later as a reader learning what he was actually saying and how you've rebelled against it in your own work?
Yeah, I mean, when you're young, especially in Puerto Rico, I think there's a lot of things about Puerto Rico that are wrong. There's a lot of things about Puerto Rico that's very right. And I grew up, if anybody made even a slightest racist comment, we have a saying, which is, ¿Y tu abuela dónde está? Like, you gonna be racist? Where's your grandma? You understand our history, right? Like, show me your family tree. Show me you don't have any Indian, any Spanish, and any black in Puerto Rico. Then you're a rock. Because if you have blood and you're born on the island, you are those three things. But you focus on the creepy stuff and how the story pulls you in, and then you grow up, and then you go like, wow, I've read a lot of horror that's just fear of the other. Fear of queer people, fear of Jew people. I fear the Jew folks. I feel the blacks. The blacks are bad. So right around the fact that I'm racist. And we all know what Lovecraft named his cat. Like, there's no doubt about that right now. But it's a retaking. It's like, all right, so I grew up with you, and then it turns out that you were garbage. So now I'm going to take Lovecraftian elements, and I'm going to make them as queer and black and brown as Caribbean as possible. Make you turn over, and you're great. Because it was cool books, it was cool stories, cool ideas, a cool mythos that inspired, and it's undeniably, it is part of horror's DNA. But I don't have to enjoy that part. I don't have to stay silent about part. So every Lovecraftian element that I've ever written about has been either Jewish or queer or brown. And then, a lot of people, there are purists out there who kind of hate that. But I think we're in a very privileged position to make a lot of people angry without having to go to their house. And that's awesome.
And Kiese, you talked about like Emma, right? Like reading like Jane Austen and Wuthering Heights, and just that. Did you, and I love your story of discovery, because I think that's what we're doing. Like that book, We Hate Everything But Girls, like you wouldn't have found that book without a library. It clearly challenged you as a reader. Do you see yourself now that you did go back to those black writers that you were told not to read as a child and read them now? Do you feel like that classics that was so white, did that inform the writing you did then when you started to write?
Oh yeah. Early on, we didn't have creative writing class or whatever, but early on, some teacher I remember asked us to write a story and draw a picture. And all of us drew these 2-story houses with like Corvettes and a dog. And none of us lived in 2-story houses. Like none of us lived in 2-story houses. One of us might have had a dog. So we not only do we think like that's what we're supposed to write and draw if you ask us to, I think that says something about what we aspire to. We aspire to the 2-family home, 2 da da da. but not really, you know what I mean? Because like if you really pushed us, I think we really loved a lot of where we were from. You saw it in the way we talked and played, you know, in the writing that I try to do. I try to bring that playfulness and that sort of like, you know, not so formal education that we get in high school and in elementary schools, which can be terrifying too, but also can be radical. And so for me, you know, we kept each other alive with the stories we told. It's just the stories we told could never be told on the page in schools. And that to me, as a grown person who tries to do this work, is a kind of horror, you know. And I think it's especially important when we think about the book bans, because a lot of us who are having our book bans, you know, had our identities banned in middle school and high school. Like, you know, we had to write ourselves out of work. And if we did it with like enough acuity and like whatever the fuck, like we got an A. And but again, like they were asking black kids in the blackest city, in the blackest state in the nation, to write your black self out in order to get an A. I think that has disastrous impacts on people who aren't encouraged to push back. I'm lucky in that I was encouraged to push back artistically.
Well, let's talk about that, because you're leading into the next question that I wanted to ask, and I, you know, I want you to keep going, because your road, both of you, to being writers, I think people would see them as not traditional, but I think they're realistic, quite honestly. There's the stories that people need to hear. So I want you to, and you both won major awards. You have critical acclaim, but yet you write stories that are completely, you know, sometimes you say, oh, literary fiction. You write stories that the average reader can read and connect with. And I think that is because, Kiese, like you just said, you both double down on who you are as people. You put yourselves and your experiences there, both to help, you know, have experiences for people that you didn't have, but also because it's the truth. And fiction, and of course you do memoir as well, Kiese, but like fiction is actually truth. It's just with, you know, a little bit made up. So can we explore your journeys as writers for people? And I want you to share the pushback you had, you know, you kind of said that, Kiese, right? You were encouraged, but I'm sure people tried to stop you at some point from sharing that real truth.
That's what I love. That's what I love in Gabino's story too, is that, you know, in writing back against Lovecraft, you're kind of being like, let's go, Lovecraft 101. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm gonna, and so for me, again, I grew up playing basketball and football, like and loving hip hop. So competition was always something I was really interested in. And as I got older, I started thinking about competition outside the confines of capitalism. But man, listen, like you can't be in Jackson and be interested in words and people not tell you you're the next. I mean, as a little kid, if you know, you could be like Faulkner, or you could be like Eudora or Welty. You know, they didn't say you could be like Wright. They didn't say you could be like Margot Walker Alexander. They didn't say you could be like, you know, any of these folk. But so in addition to like trying to write myself into existence and explore myself on the page, I was writing against these jokers. You know what I'm saying? Like I was just like, Faulkner, let's go. You know what I'm saying? Like Eudora Welty, I love your work, but fam, you didn't do us right. Let's go. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I feel like that sort of like competition, if you get to a place, but to do that, you have to see these people who've been hoisted up as like literary gods, as humans who just happen to like breathe the same air that you breathe and maybe be from around the corner from you. You know what I mean? Like, I think if you're like always looking up at these people and always looking up at the book as this sort of like precious like thing, you can't actually write oneself into it. And so I see that actually with a lot of incredible writers that I know out in the world. Like they've knelt down to literature so much that they can't actually like find and grit the grind of like who they actually are. And, you know, I think we, for whatever reason, have decided we're going to fight and love through the literature we create. But for me, it's definitely like I'm fighting against those folks.
I really think it's seen really well in Long Division. You know, the book is always described as like, it's genre defying. It's hard to describe. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's a story, right? It just doesn't use, I think that's just, if people haven't read that, I know a lot of people have read Heavy, but Long Division, it is a great example of how you can just tell a story, and not let the confines, like you said, not say like these things are held up, so I have to follow these rules. Right. And Gabino, I think you do a lot of that similarly as well with all of your books. And I think also, I want you to talk to about your journey to becoming a writer as well. And I know you specifically have things in your story about moving from small press to big press, but also the use of Spanish. And I hope you can include that in your conversation.
Yeah, no, it was 2014. I started writing in English in 2008 when I moved to the States. I'm an ASL writer. I didn't write a word I didn't know a word of English till I was like 8 or 10. So I started late, and it was first of all, it was a challenge. It was like, all right, I'm going to use this other language. I have to make sure that I use it as well as the native speakers. Otherwise, everybody's going to make fun of me. And that's sort of like a beautiful struggle in itself. Like, let me read the best so I can try to sound like the best in my own way. And I did that since between 2008 and maybe 2013. And I found myself in 2014 writing Zero Saints and struggling because my characters were speaking Spanish in my head, and I had to stop the action, and don't let it flow, translate that line, go back to the conversation. What did the other person say? Translate that again. And at one point I was so tired, I was like, you know what? I'm going to put this in Spanish and I'll translate it maybe when I edit. And when the time came to edit, I was like, this is authentic. This is how Puerto Ricans and Mexicans and Venezuelans and Cubans and Dominicans, how they talk. There's a lot of ESL folks in the United States of America. We don't have English as an official language. I can do whatever the hell I want. Ain't nobody buying this anyway. So I might as well.
It won an award. I want to tell everybody it won the Wonderland Award, so people read it.
Yeah, but you know, that don't mean people bought it anyway. So it was liberating. It was liberating. And at the time, the guy who ended up publishing, J. David Osborne, who ended up publishing Zero Saints and Coyote Songs, was at the time living in Oklahoma, married to a Mexican American who spoke Spanish all the time. And he was like, not only am I not going to translate this, I'm going to leave it as you put it. We were in Texas. I'm in Austin because we're not going to use italics. Like, wow. If that's the way that you want it, that's the way we're going to leave it. And I said, I appreciate that, because for me, the other language that you need to put in italics is the English. So let's let it all flow together. And since then, it's been like, write in American. This is an American market, and I don't want to have to use Google Translate, and this is a pain. And my response is always the same. It's like, all right, so you stepped into my shoes for a little bit, and you were uncomfortable. Maybe next time you're at a restaurant or someone's like, you run into the lady who cleans your room at the hotel, and suddenly you realize she doesn't speak English. Maybe you're going to realize this person feels a little lost. Let me slow down. Let me not be an asshole here. So if I can do that with one person, that's mission accomplished for that book. And then on to the next one, try to do it again.
So when you made the jump, though, from the small press to your two next books were with Little Brown, so Mulholland, big press. What was that like with The Devil Takes You Home first, and then obviously House of Bone and Rain, in terms of saying to them, no, we're going to keep this Spanish in there and not translate it word for word? Was that a fight?
I was extremely lucky that I found an agent with a very open mind who signed me for what I do, not for what she thought I could do. So before we went on submission, she said, I have one request, if it's okay with you. I want to sell North American rights. I want to hold world rights. I didn't know what she was talking about at the time. I was like, sure, you have it your way, lady. And then she said, come up with a list of stuff that's non-negotiable for you. And I was like, wow, I didn't know it worked that way. So I came back to her the next day with a very short list. I was like, we're not translating or using italics for the Spanish. Every person of color stays a person of color, and every queer character stays queer. If they can roll with that, we can make all the other changes. That's right. And I was extremely lucky that book sold at auction. We had 7 interested presses, and not a single one of them said we're going to push back against people of color or queer characters or your use of Spanish. So it was very lucky. I have to thank the 14 years that I spent in indie presses, because by the time I had 2 big books, it was like, this dude's been doing this for 14 years. We're not going to ask it to change. So they knew what they were getting into, and that helped a lot. I don't know if for debut authors, if like, I'm unapologetically brown, I'm the black woman you've ever met. If they will get the same amount of love, because it's like, just like it happened with you. It was like, we want you to be black, just not that black,
Right.
Well, I was gonna ask Kiese that, because Heavy is a heavy book. I mean, like I said, it won the Andrew Carnegie Medal. It's heavy in a lot of ways. The title is Perfect. Did you have pushback when you turned that in that maybe this was too much? I mean, I think it's the right amount, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Nah, again, like I've been grinding with those. My first two books were independent, sort of, and I pretty much sold those books out of my trunk and just driving around country, and we did a good job selling them. But I think that made at the time I sold it to Bloomsbury first, and then we went from Bloomsbury to Scribner. They didn't know what it was. You know what I'm saying? Like the people, like my editor brought my book from Bloomsbury to Scribner, and real talk, the reason Scribner took it was because they wanted Jesmyn, and Jesmyn was one of my great friends. But they were like, "Oh, can we get Jesmyn?" And Kathy was like, "Yeah, but I got this other dude coming." And they like, "What is the book called?" They like, "I don't care, just come on." You know what I'm saying? So they didn't know what it was, and then when I turned it in, I do think they were kind of surprised. I mean, I know they were shocked. I know people were just like, "God damn," and but nobody ever was like, you need to do less of the, actually, like people wanted, there were people on my team who wanted me to be much more explicit about some of the violence in the book. And, ultimately I decided not to, or I wrote it and then I took it out. So nobody pushed back against the book initially. They were surprised, I think, when they saw it, but they weren't like, you got to change that.
Yeah. That's good to hear. I think that you two are great examples for paving the way, which leads to the next area I want to talk about. You both teach writing, which I think is a blessing for all of the writers coming up, hearing your stories. And you teach it at the university level, both of you. So I want you to talk a little bit about some of the joy of what you see coming up through your students and what you're excited about. Gabino, why don't you go first?
I love teaching. I've had the opportunity to teach at a bunch of places, and the majority of those are extremely genre friendly. So you have some of these kids who've worked with maybe one or two old timers so far, and there's all these rigid rules about what you can and cannot do in fiction. Then they get to me and I'm like, what do you want to do in your heart? What do you want to do? This thing, we're going to do that. I don't care if it's romantasy or your cat's memoir. If it's what moves you, that's the one thing you're going to do passionately. I'm here to help you make it as good as possible, not to tell you what you should be writing or how to put your identity into the book or not, or how to not make readers uncomfortable. Because I'm transitioning. That's the thing that I've gone through twice already. I'm transitioning, and I want to talk about that. But a lot of people are going to be uncomfortable. Well, fuck them. Don't read it.
That's right. That's right.
There's a lot of people who are going to be not only comfortable, but there's a lot of people who are going to feel alone. And then when they read your stuff, they go like, man, I connected with this author. That's a beautiful thing. And if we can give them that freedom and then just kind of not on the right path, but sort of push them back into the path that they really wanted. This is why you decided to get a degree in creative writing. So you could do this one thing really well. Let's work on it. I'm not going to teach you, how to write or how to sell a thing, because no one knows what's going to sell and what's not. So it's about what brings you joy. I want to help with that all the time.
That's right.
What about you, Kiese? You're a longtime teacher too, right?
Yeah, that's so true about when I first started, when I was at MFA school. I had a professor who was talking to this guy who wanted to do some, I thought, incredible shit with vampires. And then the teacher was like, genre is for kids. And no, we took that and a lot of everybody in there had genre elements, quote unquote, in their stuff. But we were like, oh shit, we got to take that out. But retrospectively, like, yeah, fam, like genre is for kids. And thankfully, the students I teach, they embrace that wholeheartedly. They're bringing this genre element from something they loved as a young person, and this genre element, and they're like, you got to tell me why they don't mix. And as a writer, I'm like, nah, I'm gonna tell you why I think they can. Now it might not work,
right?
But we're gonna experiment in this course, and I just think that is the kind of writing that's like student led. You know what I mean? Like I'm following my students into really like this new creation of a new kind of literature that isn't bound by genre. And I think that's really important, because a lot of people like me who grew up with writing teachers who are like, you can't try anything like that,
I think you both are proving the kids are all right, but I'm glad you're there to pull them up, because I think the old ways and the especially the majority white male writers who were leading all of this were, you two happen to break away, right? In your own ways, because you had other influences. And now you're passing it on and paying it forward. So I totally appreciate that. Speaking of paying it forward, before we wrap up here, I want to give you each a chance to talk to the audience. Because again, we're celebrating discovery, reading, I want to give each of you a chance, and Kiese, I'm going to let you go first this time, so think, to share writers, readers. You can share authors, books, just something you want more people to know about and maybe go check out for themselves.
I'll just say too, Disha Philyaw to me has written the most incredible short story collection of the past decade. A short story collection called Secret Lives of Church Ladies. I think anyone who needs to believe that the short story actually can move you, I would try that. And I don't think we ever should get tired of saying this person's name. I go to a lot of schools in this country where students have not read any other literature other than Jason Reynolds. And that is because of those librarians, because of those teachers, and because of Jason Reynolds. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to say, if you haven't, please put some Jason Reynolds in front of your young people. That writer and that those books are contagious, and they open you up to so much different literature.
I would go further and say adults need to read Jason Reynolds. I've written to adults about the importance of Jason Reynolds. I've led book discussions with kids about Jason Reynolds. I was once on a plane with Jason Reynolds, and I happened to tweet about it, and then he tweeted back. He's like, "Hi." He's just an amazing human being. He fights so hard, and don't sleep on those books if you're an adult. Lonely Down is one of the best books I've ever read.
Ever.
One of the best books I've ever read. So Gabino, now it's your turn. I know you do this all the time with your New York Times column, but
it's can we use the 30 minutes to talk about how great other people
seriously
are? Yeah. It's that wave, that change that I was talking about. I think we see it across the board, but I think crime fiction and horror fiction have been sort of leading the way. It was okay to be a person of color earlier because we had a Walter Mosley, if you wrote a little bit of essays, you could say, hey, we got a Roxane Gay.
Right.
And nowadays it's we have a Silvia Moreno Garcia, we have a Stephen Graham Jones, we have a Brian Evanson breaking all the rules. We have a Haley Piper. We have folks who Eric LaRocca. They're going to bring queerness right into your face and make it work with older elements of horror and body horror. I was recently. Sometimes I like to walk around the house and read stuff out loud to feel how it punches. So when you read I'm glad Kiese brought him up. Langston Hughes. You see a little itty bitty thing from Langston Hughes, and you read it, and you're like, "Why my eyes wet?" What? That's right. It was so short and so simple, and why am I all up in my feels right now, sitting on the sofa thinking about this little poem? So I want folks to have that experience, to go read Gwendolyn Brooks, and then to go to North Carolina and read David Joy, talking about what it's like to be a white Appalachian male right now, and then go from that to read Sean Cosby, same area, same geographical area. Here's what it's like to be a black dude in the streets in Appalachia, for the past 20 years. It's a privilege to get to read all of these new folks and to say, hey, I just mentioned 3 of them: Stephen Graham Jones, Silvia Moreno Garcia, Sean Cosby, New York Times bestsellers. Yep. So it's not like they're this toiling away in darkness because they have no recognition. It's we're accepting otherness and telling folks, not only can we write as well as Faulkner and all of those folks, we can make it sometimes for this generation a little bit more interesting.
That's right.
Better.
We got monsters and shit.
We got monsters.
I mean, you know this, Gabino, but I am on the record. It's behind me on the shelf. The Only Good Indians, I believe, is the best book written this century. And that is a hill I will die on. And you've heard me die on it. Yeah. I just want to thank you so much. I think that we have given a few minutes over, but an experience for this event that's going on, to let people know about the joy of reading and discovery of books and how important it is to hear from all voices. So as we wrap up this segment of EveryLibrary Live, and I want to thank you for being here with me a second time today, but I do want everyone watching to take a moment to think about how you can safeguard libraries and the right to read. I think we gave you reasons, but you need to think about it for yourself. And EveryLibrary is a donor-supported organization that is at work every day fighting against censorship and discrimination. Please consider making a donation today to help them continue that critically important work. You should go to everylibrary.org/2024 to donate now, I would greatly appreciate that work. And thank you again to Kiese Laymon and Gabino Iglesias for this discussion. And please come back tomorrow and the rest of the week for more conversations like this one on EveryLibrary Live. And you can RSVP now to get reminders. There's a lot of events, and they're going on all week, and they are free. So we hope you join us, and we hope you share with others so we can spread this joy. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here, and best of luck with all that you do in the future going forward.
Thank you.
Likewise.